All right, so let's get right into it today. Overthinking. It's something you've mentioned that we should deep dive on. And honestly, I think it's something we all experience, at least to a certain degree. You dug up some great research for this one.
Yeah, definitely. Overthinking is one of those things that I think most of us experience, but we kind of write it off as like, oh, it's a harmless quirk or a part of my personality. But as we're going to uncover, I think the impact is more significant than a lot of people realize.
Yeah, and the research you sent is fascinating. It really dives deep into, what are the signs that you might be an overthinker? What are some of the causes? And then what are the consequences of it?
Right, absolutely. And we're not just going to leave you hanging with all the doom and gloom either. We're going to get into the practical strategies that people can use to help break free from overthinking.
Awesome. But before we get ahead of ourselves, I think we have to start with, what exactly is overthinking? Because it's more than just thinking a lot, right?
Yeah, for sure. It's not just thinking or pondering or reflecting. It's when you get stuck in this cycle of excessive analysis, replaying scenarios, dissecting decisions. Basically, your mind just becomes this hamster wheel of worry.
Okay, so it's that feeling of being trapped in your own head.
Yeah.
Unable to escape these repetitive thoughts. And you mentioned some pretty serious links to mental health in the research.
Yeah, it gets pretty serious actually when you start looking into the research. One study I came across found that chronic overthinkers had a 60% higher chance of developing generalized anxiety disorder. And it's also linked to depression, OCD, even PTSD.
Wow, that's a sobering thought.
Yeah.
Definitely not something to be taken lightly. So how do we know if we're overthinkers? What are some of the signs?
There's a few key things I think you can look for. Constant worrying is one of the biggest ones, especially if it's about things that you can't control. And if you find yourself feeling mentally exhausted all the time, overthinking burns a lot of mental energy.
Oh, I feel that mental exhaustion. It's like my brain is running a marathon, even when I'm just sitting still. Are there any other signs?
Well, do you ever find yourself constantly replaying past conversations in your head or scenarios, trying to analyze every little detail or second guessing every decision you make, no matter how small it is?
Second guessing, like I can never commit to a choice because I'm worried I'm making the wrong one.
Yeah.
And don't even get me started on imagining all the worst case scenarios.
Right. Catastrophizing. That's another classic sign where your mind kind of automatically jumps to the most negative possible outcome, even when it's highly unlikely.
So we've got the downsides, we've got the signs, but why do we overthink? What's going on in our brains?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. And the answer is a bit more complex than you might think sometimes. It's not even about finding solutions to problems. It's about getting stuck on the problem itself. Almost like we get addicted to the worry.
Addicted to the worry.
Yeah.
I feel
there's this analogy that I came across that I thought was helpful. Imagine a storm is approaching. The overthinker is the one who frets and worries about all the potential damage, while the problem solver takes action to prepare and protect themselves.
Ooh, I like that. Really speaks to shifting from worry to action. But how do we do that?
Well, one key is to understand this concept called rumination. It's basically the mental habit of chewing on the same thoughts over and over again, like a cow chewing its cud. And the thing is, rumination doesn't actually help us solve problems, it just makes things worse.
So like we're trapped in this mental loop.
Yeah.
Replaying the same negative thoughts, amplifying the anxiety and stress.
Exactly. And the research shows rumination can significantly worsen mental health, creating this vicious cycle where overthinking fuels negative emotions, which in turn fuels more overthinking.
Recognizing that we're ruminating and finding ways to break free from that cycle seems essential. But how does overthinking affect other parts of our lives? You mentioned sleep earlier.
Yeah. Sleep is a big one. When we're overthinking, our minds are racing, making it difficult to fall asleep and stay asleep. And even if we manage to doze off, the quality of our sleep suffers.
No wonder we're exhausted all the time. Our brains just never get a break. And you mentioned that overthinking can actually make decisions harder, which seems kind of counterintuitive.
It does, doesn't it? But it's true. It's called decision paralysis. When you overanalyze every single option, weighing the pros and cons endlessly, you get stuck in this loop of indecision. Like you're afraid of making the wrong choice, so you end up making no choice at all.
Been there. Waste so much time and energy trying to make the perfect decision that you never actually move forward.
Yep. And then there's the second guessing trap, where you're constantly beating yourself up over past choices.
Well, it's like mental torture. keeping us stuck in the past. Before we dive into solutions, you mentioned different types of overthinking that are often linked to these distorted thinking patterns. Can you tell me a little bit more about those?
Yeah. One of the common types is all or nothing thinking, where you see things in black and white terms, like success or failure, with no middle ground. This type of thinking can make you feel like you're constantly falling short, even when you're making progress.
Yeah. Explains why small setbacks can feel so catastrophic, like our brains are wired to magnify the negative and minimize the positive.
Right. It's like we have these mental filters, that kind of distort our perception of reality. So we end up focusing on the negative and overlooking the positive. And that can be a recipe for distress when you combine those filters with overthinking.
Right. It's like setting ourselves up for failure. Before we even begin, you mentioned other thinking patterns, though. What about that catastrophizing thing?
Oh, yeah. Catastrophizing. That's another big one, where we take a small worry and we blow it up into this worst case scenario disaster. It's like a snowball effect, It just gains momentum as it rolls downhill, turning a molehill into a mountain of anxiety.
I love that analogy, the snowball effect. I could definitely see how that plays out. Like tiny worry about a work deadline spirals into this full-blown panic attack about losing my job and being homeless.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the danger of catastrophizing. It takes you on this mental detour into a world of what ifs that are often completely unfounded. And then there's overgeneralizing, which is another way our thinking can get distorted.
Okay, overgeneralizing. I feel like I've heard that term before, but I don't know if I fully get it.
So basically, you have one negative experience, let's say. You bomb a presentation at work, and then you suddenly conclude that you're just terrible at public speaking and you'll always fail in these situations. One data point becomes the rule for all future situations.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I do that all the time. One bad date. I'm like, okay, I'm going to be alone forever. My brain just takes this one incident and turns it into some universal truth about my entire life.
Yeah. That's exactly how it works. And you can see how that kind of thinking, combined with overthinking, can really set you up for a lot of unnecessary stress and anxiety. You're basically taking a small setback and turning it into a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It's amazing how much power we give our thoughts. This really drives home the point that overthinking isn't just an annoying habit. It can have some serious consequences.
Absolutely. It's more than just a quirk. It's a pattern of thinking that can significantly impact our mental health. And even our relationships.
Speaking of relationships, I'm curious about how overthinking can affect our interactions with others. I mean, I can see how constant worrying and second-guessing yourself might create some tension, but can you give us some specific examples?
Sure. Imagine you're in a relationship and your partner's a bit late, coming home from work. An overthinker might immediately jump to conclusions, assuming the worst, like, oh, they're having an affair, or they've been in an accident. And this can lead to a spiral of anxiety, resentment, even accusations, all before you even know what's actually going on.
Ouch. Yeah, creating problems that don't even exist.
Exactly. And overthinking can also manifest as a constant need for reassurance. You might find yourself constantly asking your partner, do you still love me? Are you happy? Even when they've given you no reason to doubt their feelings.
That need for reassurance.
Yeah.
I can relate to that. It's like I need this constant validation to quiet the doubts in my mind.
And while it's natural to seek reassurance sometimes, when it becomes excessive, it can put a real strain on the relationship. Your partner might start to feel like they're walking on eggshells all the time, never knowing what's going to trigger your next wave of insecurity.
So overthinking doesn't just impact us, it also affects the people we care about, like this vicious cycle that we need to break free from.
But how? Well, that's the good news. We're not powerless against overthinking. There are proven strategies that can help us regain control of our thoughts and live a more peaceful, balanced life.
Okay, I was hoping you were going to say that. We've explored the dark side. Now let's shed some light on the solutions. What does the research suggest? What are some of the most effective ways to stop overthinking?
Well, sometimes. The most effective approach is kind of counterintuitive. It's about stepping away from the problem, allowing your mind to kind of work on it in the background, without consciously obsessing over it, like giving your brain some space to breathe.
So not forcing ourselves to stop thinking, but rather redirecting our attention.
Exactly. Engaging in activities you enjoy, gardening, painting, listening to music, spending time in nature, even just taking a long bath can be surprisingly effective. It allows your mind to decompress and process things without the pressure of conscious thought.
It's like when you're trying to remember something. And you stop trying so hard, and it just pops into your head. Sometimes letting go is the best way to find a solution.
Precisely. Our brains are amazing problem-solving machines. but they need space to operate effectively. And when we're constantly ruminating, we're essentially clogging the gears, preventing our minds from working their magic.
Okay, distraction's a powerful tool.
Yeah.
But what about those negative thought patterns? How do we tackle those head on?
Well, that's where the power of reframing comes in. It's about learning to challenge those automatic negative thoughts and replacing them with more balanced and realistic ones.
So not denying our thoughts,
Yeah.
but rather questioning their validity.
Exactly. For example, let's say you're constantly telling yourself, I'm a failure. Instead of just accepting that thought as truth, ask yourself, what evidence do I have to support this thought? What are some of my successes? What are my strengths?
Like we're playing detective, gathering evidence.
Exactly. And often when we really examine those thoughts, we realize they're based on distorted perceptions or outdated beliefs that no longer serve us.
So challenging the negative thought patterns, replacing them with positive and realistic ones. Makes sense. But what about those of us who struggle with overthinking in our relationships? You mentioned building stronger interpersonal skills. Could you elaborate on that a bit?
Sure. When we have strong interpersonal skills, we're better able to communicate our needs and boundaries, manage conflict effectively, and build healthy, supportive relationships. And when we feel secure and confident in our interactions, we're less likely to overthink every word and action.
So it's not just about the overthinking itself, but also the underlying insecurities.
Exactly. Think of it this way. If you have a strong foundation, you're less likely to be shaken by the winds of doubt and insecurity.
Okay, I like that analogy. Building a sturdy house. That can withstand those storms of overthinking. But what about when our minds just won't quiet down? Any techniques to calm those racing thoughts? Find some inner peace.
Yeah, definitely. Mindfulness and meditation have been proven to be incredibly effective in managing overthinking. These practices help us train our attention, become more aware of our thoughts and feelings without judgment, and cultivate a sense of inner calm.
Meditation. I've been meaning to try it, but I always have these excuses. It just seems so intimidating. Like you need to be a Zen master or something.
That's a common misconception. Meditation isn't about emptying your mind or achieving some blissful state. It's simply about paying attention to the present moment, noticing your thoughts and feelings without getting carried away by them.
So creating a space between our thoughts and our reactions.
Exactly. And even a few minutes of daily meditation can make a big difference. There's tons of apps and guided meditations available to help you get started.
Okay, I'm adding try meditation to my to-do list. Seems like a really powerful tool
Yeah.
for managing overthinking and just finding a sense of peace in the chaos. But what about those of us who struggle with overthinking because of past mistakes or regrets? How do we move on and stop beating ourselves up?
That's where self-compassion comes in. It's about learning to treat ourselves with the same kindness, care, and understanding that we would offer to a good friend.
Self-compassion. I definitely need to work on that. It's so much easier to criticize myself than to offer myself grace.
Yeah, it's a common struggle. But the research shows self-compassion is incredibly powerful in breaking free from negative thought patterns, including overthinking, when we're able to forgive ourselves for our past mistakes and accept our imperfections. We create space for growth and healing.
It's like releasing ourselves
Right.
from the prison of self-judgment. But what about when overthinking feels totally overwhelming, like we're drowning in worry? At what point should we consider seeking professional help?
Oh, absolutely. If you're struggling to manage overthinking on your own, reaching out to a therapist can be incredibly helpful.
And not a sign of weakness, is it? It's about recognizing when we need support.
Right. A therapist can provide personalized guidance and support, teach you specific techniques for managing overthinking, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and help you address any underlying mental health concerns that might be contributing to the problem.
It's good to know that we don't have to struggle alone, that there are resources and support systems out there.
Absolutely. And remember, asking for help is a sign of strength and self-awareness. It takes courage to acknowledge that you need support and to take steps to improve your mental well-being.
Okay, we've covered a lot today. Really explored the ins and outs of overthinking, from the causes to the impacts. And we've learned about some powerful strategies for breaking free from those mental loops and reclaiming our peace of mind. As we wrap up, what are some of the key takeaways you want listeners to remember?
You know, for me, the biggest takeaway is that overthinking is often disguised as something else, like productivity or problem solving, when in reality, it's just keeping us stuck. Recognizing that is the first step, I think, to breaking free.
You know, like we're spinning our wheels, going through the motions of thinking, but not actually getting anywhere. And as we discussed, the impact on our mental health, our emotional well-being, it's significant. It can really drain us. and keep us from experiencing, joy and connection.
Absolutely. But the good news is we have all these strategies we can use, whether it's distraction, reframing those negative thoughts, or practicing self-compassion. We can really shift our mindset from worry to empowerment.
Love that. From worry to empowerment. I think that really captures it. It's not about, stopping thinking altogether. It's about learning to manage our thoughts, becoming the captain of our own mental ship.
Exactly. And for those who need a little extra support, therapy can be so helpful. It's not about fixing yourself, but it's about learning those healthier coping mechanisms, building resilience so we can navigate those challenges with a little more grace.
So for everyone listening, what does this mean for you? Overthinking is something we all deal with, but it doesn't have to rule our lives.
Right. The research is clear. With a little effort and the right tools, we can break free from those mental loops and live a more peaceful life, more productive, more fulfilling. And remember, even small changes can make a big difference. Start with one strategy that resonates with you and see how it goes.
Yeah, you might need to experiment a bit to find what works best for you. Maybe it's taking up a new hobby to distract yourself, or practicing mindfulness meditation, or maybe even setting aside like specific worry time to contain those anxious thoughts, or talking to a therapist.
The key is to be proactive. Recognize that you have the power to change your thinking, and that can change your whole experience.
This has been such an insightful deep dive for anyone out there still battling those overthinking tendencies. You're not alone. We all have those moments. The important thing is to recognize them, learn how to manage them, and be kind to yourself. Until next time, keep those minds curious, but keep them kind.